Now I'm very excited to have a chance to sit down with Emmy-winning and 4 times James Beard Award-winning TV personality, chef, writer, and teacher, Chef Andrew Zimmern. Please welcome him to the stage. I have to say a little bit more about him. Because he is so cool and has done so much. He is the creator, executive producer, and host of the Travel Channel's Bizarre Foods franchise. Andrew Zimmern's Driven by Food and the Emmy-winning Zimmern List. He has devoted his life, and this is why I like this man so much, and I've been admiring him from afar for a long time. He's devoted his life to doing a lot of the things that we've talked about at Future of Food, really exploring the cultural significance of food, looking at equity and diversity, making sure that we all feel sort of empowered through food, that food is delicious, which is really such an important part of these conversations that often gets left out. So, and apparently, he's also a paramedic. I saw him help a woman last night who was bleeding. So he's an all-around Renaissance kind of man who I'm so glad to sit next to.
Chefs, excuse me. Chefs carry little Ziploc bags with Band-Aids and stuff in them, and I was lucky enough that I had a piece of gauze that I could tourniquet this woman's wrist. And everyone was looking at me like, why were you carrying that? It's like, I cut myself all the time.
Every day.
The last thing I need is a little paper cut or knife cut while I'm talking to you, and I have to put it under my knee or something. So, yeah, I was glad that I was there to witness that. It was very surreal, wasn't it? We were standing there together, and the woman is okay, and that's all that matters.
That's all that matters. Thank you again for being a hero.
So the lesson is always carry a little Ziploc bag with you with a couple of first aid things, and you too can help someone.
You too can be Andrew Zimmern. So I want to get into some serious stuff. That you've done so much over the last 2 years. Let's talk about the pandemic, the Independent Restaurant Association, all that you've seen sort of unfold. I know you have so many thoughts on this, and I know you're probably tired of talking about it, but I want to keep reminding people that the pandemic is not over.
Correct.
2, that restaurants and restaurant workers and farmers and truck drivers and so many others have suffered greatly, either lost their lives, been out of work, been homeless. All of these things have unfolded, and just because it's sunny outside and we're all here together at South by Southwest, not all is sunny in the restaurant industry right now.
Yeah, COVID is clearly on the decline here in the vast majority of our country. However, elsewhere, it's either not declining. In some cases, I just read last night on some of my online news sources that it's, by the way, real ones, that it is... I love speaking in front of an audience of like-minded people who get my sub-references. And so it's not over, and the illnesses, the social ills that were created by the pandemic are in some cases just beginning.
Right.
The reference that you made to the Independent Restaurant Coalition, I would encourage everyone to go to saverestaurants.com. Cut and paste some stuff. We have letters to send your representatives at the municipal, state, and federal levels. We were an association of food people who got together in March of 2020 and tried to figure out how we could best save restaurants.
Right.
Because we knew, we could see it because we've been in the restaurant business for so long, that this special group of businesses, and most importantly, special group of employees, and as importantly, special groups of businesses that feed into restaurants. We've read nothing but talk over the last 2 years about the supply chain and that whole thing, right? Those feed restaurants, right? 75% of the seafood that's sold in America is sold in restaurants, right? Restaurants are the second largest employer in America other than the U.S. government, and the U.S. government is only number one because of the Defense Department and all those people in our armed services. Independent restaurants alone, that's not chains, just independent restaurants are 5% of GDP. If you start to fold in all the suppliers, the food chain, hotels, tourism, right? People go to the Chesapeake during the summer to eat crabs, right? People go to New Orleans to have conventions, stroll the Garden District and other beautiful parts of that city, like the French Quarter, but they go there to eat, right? When I say the word New Orleans, you can all taste it, right? And so when everything stops, who's going to be hurt the most but this incredible industry that represents, if you fold everything together, almost 20% of GDP. It's an astounding figure. During most of COVID, the number one category of unemployed people caused by the pandemic were restaurant workers. Restaurants were open, then they were closed, then they were open, closed, and it was different between the city of Austin and a city 100 miles away, like Waco. I'm just using a Texas example. It was different in Minneapolis than it was in Rochester, Minnesota, because a lot of these were municipal decisions or statewide decisions if mandated by a governor who was willing to stand up like ours. But there were many governors that said, oh, we're going to leave it up to the municipalities, right? And sort of took the coward's way out. So we decided that we were going to use singleness of purpose on this issue, and we were just going to lobby Washington, D.C. for money for restaurants, full stop. That was it. And we helped get PPP created, but PPP didn't work for restaurants. You can't get 12 weeks worth of money if you're closed, right? There's no, you get the money, you just got to return it. So we worked with bipartisan group in Congress, actually Chip Roy from Texas and Dean Phillips, my congressman from Minneapolis, and we created the fix for PPP. We tried to get the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, $120 billion, which was the money that we needed to give to restaurants to sustain them. We only got $30 billion through the SBA, through the RRF. And now we're trying to get the RRF refilled. It was struck down. It was cut out of an omnibus bill. We're still trying to get restaurants money. And it's very, very important to do that. 100,000 restaurants closed across America, but I think there's another 100,000 that are dead, but they just don't know it yet. And the reason is they don't want to look at those statements from the bank that keep telling them that all the debt that piled up, all the pivoting that they did, all the credit cards that were maxed out, all the times they asked their cousin to come over and wash dishes in exchange for a free meal, that it's just not going to be sustainable. And the reason is that you can have a restaurant on that corner that got RRF money and is able to pay a dishwasher $22 an hour and pay their employees a healthcare stipend, right? Wish they could pay all their healthcare, but at least a stipend. But the restaurant on the other corner didn't get RRF money. And the problem there is that guess who's going to go out of business? Because guess where the person is going for a dishwasher job? Where they're going to go to the place where they finally have some benefits and they finally have a living wage and they don't have to make $12 an hour. They can get $22 an hour, right? It is extremely problematic to have given money to some restaurants and not to others. Right. And so we're pushing very hard for an equitable solution to this. Restaurant environments have been very brittle from an economic sustainability standpoint for the last 50 years. They keep making less and less money. They keep making it up at the bar, which is an unsustainable thing because you're still going to be a 70-30 restaurant percentage of food to liquor. Maybe you get to 33%. But you're not going to be able to afford to pay the farmers what they need to get for their food because farmers have... You talk about another industry that's taken it in the shorts. I was speaking to a clam farmer a couple of years ago, and he said that over the course of 20 years, he's only been able to charge another 30 cents a pound wholesale for his clams. But the cost of everything from his kids' textbooks to the oil and gas he puts in his heater, his car, to the food he puts in his fridge, to the rent he pays for his house has gone up hundreds of percentage points. And so this fifth generation clam fisherman is not going to be able to pass that down to his kids. In fact, is telling his kids, don't do this job. don't do this job. And he starts crying when he talks about getting up at 3 a.m. and heading out in the skiff through the sloughs of South Carolina to dig for the best clams that he can give to his customers. It's extremely sad. And so I work very hard to sort of unwind and untangle these issues and address them one by one, because it is astronaut theory. Any astronauts in the room? Oh, good, then I'm the expert. So the astronaut theory of solving problems is that during any given day, an astronaut needs to solve 1,000 problems, but they don't think of them all at once. They literally go from one to the next in the most disciplined, ordinary fashion you could possibly imagine. Because when you're in space, if you forget something or make a mistake, it's really bad. So it is a one by one process, and I've sort of adapted that in some of the social justice work that I do. If once I solve one problem, if it leads to another, then that's great. I'll move on to the other once I've done whatever it is I can on that given issue. And what I've learned over the years in doing it is that when it comes to the food world, I thought I was jumping onto a swing, right? Good days, bad days, I'm on the swing, I'm talking about food. It turned out that I was jumping onto a Mobius strip of a roller coaster. And so I jumped in, let's say in trying to solve hunger problems in the world. And then I bumped into food waste. And then I bumped into the brittle economies of restaurants. And then I bumped into the plight of the American farmer and the aging out of farmers. And then I bumped into immigration issues, which we can't solve the food waste issue if we don't solve our immigration problems in America, because we won't have people to take the lettuce out of the field and the farmer just tills it under and plants more seed. Right?
Absolutely.
So you keep bumping into these issues, and it all bumps into climate change, right? And it keeps going on and on and on and on and on. It goes even to healthcare and the criminal justice system, because if we fed people better, the pressure on our healthcare system would be less. The pressure on our criminal justice system would be less. You don't have to take my word for it. You can look this up, Google it, and my friend from Google laughed at that. Look it up, because there incredible studies have shown that when you feed people in jails and institutions better, and you actually teach them a trade like cooking, because guess what? Who's the number one employer in America of returning citizens from jails and institutions? Restaurants. Who's the number one employer of single moms? Restaurants. Number one employer of new Americans? Restaurants. Number one employer of last-time job seekers? Restaurants. First-time job seekers, restaurants. So it's so vitally important that wherever you jump in, you sort of realize that you are dealing with an ecosystem of issues. Yeah. And that's why over the years, I came to South by Southwest 6 years ago to talk about aquaculture. And now I've been here for 8 days talking about a whole variety of issues. And people say, well, you're not you don't do that, or you don't do this. Why are you on that panel? And the reason is because it's all the same fucking issue.
Yeah,
sorry.
Absolutely.
Sorry,
don't be
sorry, kids in the room.
Sorry.
Yikes. I apologize, moms at home with kids.
You're fine.
The problem is so maddening to me. We do have an ecosystem of problems that wherever you all jump in, and we all jump in on a different issue, but eventually we bump in to another issue that either can help us, right, or provides a roadblock to us. And that's why I love conferences like this, and why I love you people, because you all are the ones. I can't work on everything, right? I can lend my name to something because I have a platform, or maybe I can write a check for $100 to some people that need some money to pay their employees. But the fact of the matter is that we all have to work together, pushing 100 different levers at the same time if we're going to make a difference. It doesn't matter what we do to solve the hunger problem in America, right? Don't get me started on that because that's a genocide issue. It doesn't matter what we do, because if we still have the food waste problem and the climate crisis problem, and we're aging out farmers, and we're still keeping 75% of the production of most foods in the hands of just several companies, it is not going to make the dent necessary to recover. Right? So we have to do several things at the same time. It's kind of like allergy and flu season.
Yeah.
I get seasonal allergies, and I used to take one medicine, and my allergist said, no, you need to take these 3, right? One of them just helps me to not cough and sneeze. Then the other one actually helps prevent the spores from activating in my body. And the other one is just like an aspirin compound that takes my headache away. But I have to take 3 things. And for whole my life, it wasn't working. Only taking 1.
Sure.
It's the same kind of thing. We all have to push these levers together. So I know you asked me about restaurants, but it is a spider's web, an ecosystem of the most vital and important issues to all Americans. And it is truly existential, because if we aren't working on our climate crisis, right, at the same time that we're working in our own hometowns, in our own city blocks, to help other people just by knocking on doors and dropping off food, because hunger is all around us, right? Food waste is all around us. Make your refrigerator smaller, take out drawers, take out a shelf, shop less, you'll throw away less. Shop less, you'll throw away less. If you're not doing all these things, then you might as well not do any of them.
Sure.
You know, it's like going to the gym and just taking a steam bath. Well, that's not going to do a lot. You know, I'm
Absolutely.
60. I'd like to be walking when I'm 70, so I got to be doing my sit-ups. That's how I got this body.
So you brought up some really interesting points. I have a lot to filter through here. One thing that you said is that you love talking to an audience of like-minded people. And I do too. But who we need to reach is the people who aren't like-minded.
But like-minded people need to talk about how we're going to talk to the other people. Okay? I'm 60, okay? When I was growing up, it wasn't like the 2 political parties in our country agreed on much. But what they did agree on was that they needed to co-regulate before they operationalized. They needed to understand where the other side was coming from. And then when you understand where the other side is coming from, you can then operationalize or take some action. And it may not be something that each side gets all of what they want, but it was called compromise, and some really amazing legislation got passed, small and large, at the municipal, state, and federal level. Okay, so that's, just pick a time, 45 years ago. Today, the thing that depresses me the most is the literal inactivity of our governments, and the inability to get done what is neither left nor right, not red or blue, but rather is simply forward for humankind. I don't understand how any politician could be against feeding hungry children. How are you against feeding hungry children?
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is that actual numbers have been run on this. So it costs $22 billion a year to feed all the hungry people in America. Okay? It's an actual number, right? So if we can do that, by the way, we have the $22 billion to do that. As I learned yesterday from an economist who I was having dinner with, that's a rounding error on our annual GDP here in America. I mean, it's a rounding error, okay? So it's a couple of airplanes. I mean, people make all the analogies in the world, but it's something like $22 billion,
sure.
Right? So if we do that, the savings in our healthcare system, criminal justice system, all those other places I was talking about, the number of jobs that would be created to feed those millions of hungry people, right? Because we have 23% of Americans don't know where their next 3 meals are coming from, right? It's not food insecurity, it's hunger, right? So if we do that, it actually pays for itself within the first year because we save money somewhere else, right? So it's not, can we afford the $22 billion? It's we can't afford not to, because it's going to help other areas that we spend $1.5 trillion just fighting the big 4 food diseases, right? So if we fed everyone and we fed them healthy, nutritious food, right, then we are going to see our healthcare costs go down, medicine costs are going to, all that kind of stuff, right? But the question was, how do you talk to the other side, or why am I so thrilled to talk to the like-minded? Because the message that I want to give, one of many messages I hope you take away today, is that we have to not be screaming, yelling, and throwing rocks at people on the other side. That does not make anybody want to talk to us. What we need to do is find ways to engage with those companies, with those politicians, with those people, and try to co-regulate with them. Now, I fully admit, there is a certain percentage look, I'm a left-wing Lindsay liberal from New York City. I'm not on Karl Marx's left knee, but I'm kind of got one part of my tush on his right. I wouldn't label myself a socialist utopian, but other people have called me a socialist utopian. But I do know that there are people to the left of me who will never talk to anyone, even in the center, right? So I kind of forget about them. And there's people on the far, far, far right of things who will never talk to me. I mean, they may never talk to me just because of how I feel about, social issues, right? Or how I live my life. That's fine, I forget about them. But there's like 90% of folks, right, who we need to find a way to talk to. And that means supporting people on the other side who are doing some good and saying, hey, I don't believe everything you're doing is right, but I saw that you voted, yes, to cut oil subsidies, right, for example, or you voted yes to increase SNAP, right? So thank you for doing that. How do you vote yes for increasing SNAP, but still want to keep people away from the voting booth in your home state that you represent? That's a fair question to ask a politician, right? Because they should be on the same side, in the same ecosystem of issues. So we have to learn how to communicate with each other. Yeah. There are many big businesses out there. I'm from Minnesota, so I use General Mills as an example. They make sugary cereals that are not good for kids. They make a lot of other products that aren't great for people, right? And yet I keep talking about how much I love them. Because do you know who spends the most money in the world researching drought-resistant grains? General Mills, right? And if we're going to combat our climate crisis, this never-ending, always increasing doom scroll that is, every day in some way it's getting worse somewhere, it's not getting better. We need to be doing stuff like supporting new farmers with new types of crops that are built for the next 30 years. Especially, Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, one of the most horrifying things that I've seen in my lifetime, has caused, amongst other things, wheat prices to spike, and it will only get worse. So the more sources of different kinds of grain that we have, the better. So do I endorse everything that General Mills does? No. They're big food. They don't do everything right, but they spend the most money trying to do something that's going to make a huge amount of difference. And if they do that, I know there's people in that building that are on my side, and we can find them, and through them talk to the other people about putting natural, wholesome ingredients in Hamburger Helper. Because guess what? At a couple dollars a box, add a pound of meat, a family of 4 that is extremely low income, that's time poor and dollar poor, has something more nutritious to feed their family, right? So I believe in that too. I just want Hamburger Helper to be healthier, right? I'd like them to use real carrots and peas and onions grown by a real farmer in their Hamburger Helper in that little pouch, or organic cheese that is very easily turned into a powder. My kid can do it with his Fisher-Price molecular gastronomy kit, right? I've done it. I can do it right now in the back room if you give me the right 3 ingredients that are found in nature, right? So there are lots of companies out there doing really, really, really incredible things, which means there's like-minded people in there. We need to co-regulate with them and figure out how to operationalize and change the other half of that company. I was talking to someone yesterday who actually I'm going to be on a panel with later, and who is a behavioral scientist. And my biggest complaint about all of this, or the biggest frustration that I have, and I'm sure you all share it too, is we knew that not wearing seatbelts killed people. And we knew that in the early 60s. But it wasn't until almost 45 years later that we made laws in states that said you had to wear one. Every car my dad bought when I was a kid, we stuffed the seatbelts down in between the seat. That's how I grew up, right? Now, anyone under the age of 40 just buckles up automatically because it's been the law since you've been driving, right? I mean, you never knew anywhere different. We knew cigarettes were killing people, but it took 40 years to put a warning label on a pack and get the commercials off of TV, right? So why do social justice movements occur at this sort of glacial pace? And I think one of the things that we can do to help speed things up is to get more people engaged. And if we want more people engaged, then we can't just be like, yeah, and whipping each other up into a blood frenzy.
Yeah.
You know, like
Agreed.
I love Vikings on Netflix. You know, it's not like that. We also have to do the rest of the work, which is go to the next village and get more people, some of whom are like-minded, some of whom aren't, to understand why we're fighting for what we're fighting for. We need to it's more conversation, it's more conversation, it's more conversation, which is why I love, and I'm sure this question is coming at some point, like a takeaway. Do what you want with your money. There's lots of places to donate to. But if everybody, went to, what website would they go to for all of this?
Foodtank.com.
Foodtank.com, and cut and paste material that is already beautifully written on that website in a gazillion pages that are on there, or just send a clip of an interview from someone that you liked and send it to the link to everyone in your mailing list. By the way, half of them don't agree with you, even if they're your friends. Trust me, half of my friends don't agree with me. And just say, please give this a listen, right? That's how we're going to change hearts and minds. And guess what? We're going to do that quickly enough and support politicians who are like-minded. Ask the hard questions. In my lifetime, there's only been one time I've ever heard a presidential candidate asked about a kitchen table issue. And it happened in the last election. There was a reference to food and a bunch of other things. But, weather, food, economic growth. I mean, just telling you that the largest group of employees in America, other than those cashing a U.S. government paycheck, are in independent restaurants, means that independent restaurants are really bigger. Like Main Street America restaurants are much bigger than we thought. Why aren't we talking about unemployment through the lens of the restaurant worker? Why aren't we talking about decentralizing the food systems in America? Why aren't we talking about those things at the municipal, state, and federal debates that are going to be coming up in every town we all live in? I don't know where you all are from, right? But I know that I'm going to be very active this year doing just that, because we've seen what has happened in other issues, how powerful state governments are, right? We're a mile from the state capital of Texas. I know there's a lot of things going on here politically, but we need to make sure that on the issues that we're talking about on this stage, that the representatives in that building understand where we come from, because you shouldn't be for keeping children hungry. We have the ability to solve hunger tomorrow in America. Literally tomorrow, we could start feeding. Statistically, end hunger would probably take about a week, because the big companies, food companies, also have distribution, right? They have warehouses, they have trucks that go all over. So maybe it won't take a week, maybe it'll take a month, okay? But I'm sure there are some people here who are, engineering wonks that could make it happen pretty darn fast. We can statistically end hunger metaphorically tomorrow. To choose not to do so, since we have the ability to do it, to me makes it genocidal. And just leap in on that issue, and let's talk to everyone we can about it. It's vitally important to it is truly existential, an overused word in most cases, but I think in this room is very appropriate.
No, so important. And, I want to spend the rest of our time, we have about 10 minutes left, to talk about...
I don't have 2 hours?
No. I wish. So I want to spend the rest...
I better start talking less.
No, it's all good. I just want to spend a little time, I was talking to your friend Tom Colicchio recently about how we change this bro culture that has existed in the restaurant industry for so long. I want to go from how we save restaurants to how we rebuild them differently. Mm-hmm. And how do we, get rid of the racism, the misogyny, the inequity that is pervasive throughout the restaurant industry?
I hate to say it, but you have to sort of get quiet, shut your eyes, and think to yourself, what is it that all restaurants have in common that they all do? They all buy food at one price and sell it for a higher price. And the difference between the two is where they pay their taxes and pay all their bills. We need, and this is why refilling the RRF is so important.
Yeah.
We need to be supporting restaurants that are serving less meat, more vegetables, more beans and farinaceous foods in an effort to manage prices on their plate. And if you are in that small percentage of people that can afford to go to fancy restaurants, make sure that you are communicating. I was thrilled to see that at both meals that I was able to eat out here in Austin, the animal protein was the smallest piece of what was on the plate, right? When I was growing up, you'd get a half chicken, a half a head of broccoli, this giant baked potato, and help yourself to the salad bar.
Sure.
And it was $17, right? Well, last year, this year, that same half chicken is now $18, right? Now, the gin martini has gone from $4 well to $26, botanically created gin, mixologist created, special fig and honey bitters, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And the people who are drinking the martini have no problem transitioning over the course of a generation from a $4 well martini to the $24 bespoke martini. But the people who see the price of the chicken dish at their favorite restaurant go from $17 to $26 start yelling at servers, okay? We have to start paying the real price to farmers for their food. Farmers, once they get that money, right, can do what they want to expand crops and grow vertically and create more, right? And then when the food comes to restaurants, after they've paid the fair cost of what that food costs, they have to pass it on to us. Now, the secret, right, to how to keep the plate cost lower is to use less of the most expensive ingredient, which 99 times out of 100, please don't scream out chanterelle mushrooms at me. I know there's some exceptions to the rule, but it is the protein in the middle of the plate, right? So remember I talked before about how it affects every other issue? This is why I support aquaculture. This is why I support vegan before dinner. This is why I'm serving a piece of meat to 6 people and lots of other stuff around it and share it in what I call the Turkish way of eating, which I love it. But it's really a way of eating that's popular all throughout the Levant and Central Asia. And it is vitally, vitally important for us to be patient with restaurants as they raise their prices for what goes on the plate. They have artificially kept those prices lower because customers revolt. Study after study, we're adding 3% surcharge so we can give our employees, health care benefits. Right. And people start yelling at servers about it.
Right.
The restaurant industry, as it has existed, let's just say for the last 20 years, has been economically brittle. I'm talking in general now. Economically brittle, economically unsustainable. And because they're not making any money, they cannot take care of their employees. So that that bro culture, the misogyny, the extra long hours, all the rest of that has to be eliminated. And the way we do that is to make restaurants more economically sustainable and help them. Now, restaurants have a responsibility too, right? When I spoke to Tom a couple weeks ago, well, actually this was maybe 2 months ago, and I asked him about schedules in his restaurants because we were currently then dealing with, an employee shortage.
Right.
And he said at all his restaurants, he's open either 4 or 5 days a week and cut back on meal periods and shrunk menus so that what he could do is he could keep his employees employed and sort of share the problem with everyone.
Right.
So, you don't have someone working 20 hours, another one working 50 that you have to pay 10 hours of overtime. You kind of keep everyone at 35 and you help network with other restaurants if they need some help, right? It is a labyrinthine exercise,
Sure.
but it is vitally important that we reshape restaurants in America. One of the things that happened at the very beginning of my food career, when I came back from Europe after training there, is there was something called the Grand Cafe that was the way in which every restaurant opened. It didn't matter whether it was Italian or continental or whatever. And that was 200 seats with 80 items on the menu. I mean, because everyone wanted choice, right? Don't do that anymore, right? You go to a taco place for taco and a fried chicken place for fried chicken and a steak place for steak and a sushi bar for sushi, and let's take the pressure off of restaurants to do everything at once. I personally think 30 years from now, all the restaurant businesses in America, except those serving the top, let's just say 1%,
Sure.
are going to be, it's going to look more like Japan. Right? Where there is a tempura restaurant and a sushi, and they're going to be smaller with a smaller payroll, and they're going to be more nimble. It's why I like Austin's food trucks, and it's why I'm a partner in a food hall in Atlanta, because we have many micro economies, and it turns out if you have many businesses all just doing X, you don't need to have a 10X sized restaurant, which is unsustainable. You have 2 or 3 snowstorms in Minnesota in the winter, your month is shot, right? You're down. And restaurants at 7-8% of the bottom line then can't afford the things that we need to do to keep restaurants sustainable from a social justice and equity position.
Absolutely.
I also think restaurants are working very, very hard. People have been slamming restaurants for all of those issues, rightfully so.
Sure.
But in the last 3 or 4 years, no industry in America has done more to reset the equity table than restaurants. None that I know of. We still have a far way to go, right? And you're talking to someone, I'm a 60-year-old white guy, okay? So early in my career, I was the problem, okay? So I've lived on both sides of this. And I can tell you right now that all of my businesses that I'm involved in look radically different than businesses I worked for 30 years ago. And that's called intentionality. And you need to support restaurants that look like all of us, right? I mean, that's what you got to do. It's why I support independent restaurants and not the other people, because independent restaurants are the ones that are actually making the change faster,
Absolutely.
paying their employees more, making sure that women and people of color have first bite at the apple. I mean, you asked about the Independent Restaurant Coalition in our work. In our endorsement of the RRF, we were the ones that insisted that restaurants that, I think the figure was made less than $1 million a year, were owned by people of color and female-owned business. Those 3 groups, and if you checked all 3, you got your money first, that those 3 were prioritized. And guess what? A group of old white guys threw the racism flag up in the air and said you were biased against old white guys. It was kind of mind-boggling. Now, luckily, the money had all gone out and had run out, and it all sort of became a moot point. But there are people who actually don't believe in resetting the equity table. And that's why we need to support people who do want to reset the equity table. That's not just politicians, that's restaurants. Vote with your pocketbooks, right? I think that's a vitally important piece of it. If the place that doesn't want to reset the equity table goes out of business, I really don't feel sorry for them.
Yeah.
I want to support the places that do reset the equity table.
No, and I'm glad you brought up intentionality again. It's about being intentional about these things. It's about doing it the right way. I think this has been such an interesting discussion. I applaud you for all of the work that you've done. You've inspired us all. I want to end with something that happened at the Fed by Blue dinner the other night that I thought was really a good way to sum you up. I was sitting across from a woman who was eating the salmon that you had helped, you'd prepared. It was
That was my dish.
That was your dish. And she was like, in heaven, to say the least. And as she put her fork down, she said, "I'm so sad that I'll never get to eat that again. So thank you, Chef, for all that you do."
Well,
and
here's the thing, though, and I understand what she meant, because the room was beautiful, the environment was, everyone was talking about it. It was a lovely, dinner time activation supporting a cause that I believe in very strongly, which is aquaculture. It's one of many things we need to do to help reset our food system. But the fact of the matter is that you can buy sustainably raised salmon, right? And you can, and this is not a plug for my website, you can go on andrewzimmern.com or any of a number of websites and find a yummy sauce and a nice veg to go with it. We can all eat that way. It was my point with my dish. The cooks in the kitchen were all like, "Is that it?" Because it was so simple, right? I had 4 elements on the plate. That was it. It was 4 elements. And one of those each element only had 2 ingredients, one of which was salt in the case of the mustard greens, because they were local and they were so delicious from a farmer here. The salmon just had salt on it, right, before we cooked it. The sauce had 5 ingredients in it, and it had no salt at all. Because I made it with dashi and miso, so it didn't need any salt, right? And it had a little bit of chili oil that had a couple ingredients in it. The point being, simple, easy, delicious, nutritious food that does the world good when you look at the plate, because everything on there was very harmonious and and co-regulating with all of our ideas here. All of that food is available to us, and it can be delicious. We can celebrate that joy in our lives of sharing a good meal together, while at the same time screaming at politicians to make a change faster.
Absolutely.
The two are not mutually exclusive, so
absolutely.
There you have it.
What a great point to end on. Please give him a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It is now my pleasure to introduce someone I love and who has been such a great partner to Food Tank and all of the collaborators for this event, Iffy Roma, the Future of Food producer. She is the best. I also want to give a quick shout out to my co-founder, Bernard Pollock, the whole Food Tank team, our production team, and everyone who has made this possible, including the workers behind all of it. Thank you all so much.